My name is Patrick DeGlaris. I am the Assistant Department Head and Archivist for the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And today is a very special treat. As you all know, we are here to listen to a book talk from Dr. Harold C. Aldridge, Jr. on his book, Segregation and Desegregation in the Oklahoma Public Schools. What you may not have known is we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Virginia Schoats, a 1978 OSU grad, who was his high school teacher, was in the Moton, the Taft Public School and high schools? Yeah, so was his high school teacher, and she agreed to join us, and she's here with her daughter, who drove all the way from Illinois just to make sure she got here. So we are very excited to welcome you both back to OSU. Dr. Aldridge didn't finish here, but he came here for a little bit and had some fun, and then ended up elsewhere. We won't get into that. So I want to say thank you to, let me make sure I say everything right here, the OSU Center for Africana Studies and Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies, Lou Bailey and Dr. Lou Bailey and Erica Townsend Bell for helping to sponsor this event. And before we get into the discussion with the two of them, it'll be a Q&A. We'll have some questions. We'll let them talk. We'll cut them off to give time for you folks to ask them questions. But to get us started, we asked Dr. Autumn Brown, who's an oral historian in our program and whose research focuses on Black education in Oklahoma, among many other things, to give us a bit of an intro or overview of education in Oklahoma, just to help frame the conversation we're going to have today. So I will turn it over to Dr. Brown.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. To understand the history of Black education in Oklahoma is to understand a story shaped by aspiration and constraint, brilliance and brutality, ingenuity and injustice. It is a story that begins even before statehood, when formerly enslaved people, Black migrants from the Deep South, and Black indigenous freedmen came to Indian Territory carrying a fierce belief in the power of schooling. Education was not an abstraction. It was protection. It was political strategy. It was freedom work. When Oklahoma became a state in 1907, it did so as a Jim Crow state. The promise of opportunity that drew thousands of Black families during the land runs was quickly narrowed by segregation laws that codified racial separation in public life. The doctrine of separate but equal, sanctioned nationally by Plessy versus Ferguson, structured public schooling in Oklahoma for more than half a century. On paper, Black and white children were to receive equal facilities and resources. In practice, Black schools were chronically underfunded, overcrowded, and supplied with secondhand textbooks passed down from white schools. And yet, this is only part of the story, because separate did not mean inferior in spirit. Across Oklahoma, whether in Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Muskogee, or in all-Black towns like Boley and Langston, Black educators built institutions that were rigorous, disciplined, and deeply invested in their students. Teachers often held advanced degrees. Principals were community leaders. Schools functioned not only as sites of instruction, but as cultural anchors, hosting plays, graduations, political meetings, athletic rivalries, church gatherings, and civic organizing. They were spaces where Black children saw themselves reflected in authority, brilliance, and possibility. Institutions like Langston University, founded in 1897 as the Colored, Agricultural, and Normal University, helped train generations of Black teachers who would fan out across the state. In many communities, the Black school was the largest public building Black residents could claim as their own. It was a sanctuary in a segregated world. Then, in 1954, the United States Supreme Court handed down its unanimous decision in Brown v. Board of Education, declaring that segregated public schools were inherently unequal and therefore unconstitutional. Nationally, Brown is often remembered as a clean moral triumph, a moment when the law caught up with justice. But history is rarely so simple. From a national perspective, Brown destabilized the legal foundation of Jim Crow and signaled a shift in constitutional interpretation under Chief Justice Earl Warren. It offered psychological language about the harms of segregation and energized a growing civil rights movement. Yet the ruling provided no specific timeline for implementation. That ambiguity became a battleground. In 1955, in what is commonly called Brown II, the court ordered desegregation to proceed with all deliberate speed. Those three words, deliberate speed, allowed states wide latitude to delay. Oklahoma's response was cautious, strategic, and gradual. Unlike states in the Deep South that staged massive resistance, Oklahoma adopted a quieter form of delay. Some districts initiated token integration, admitting a handful of Black students into previously white schools under strict transfer policies. Others redrew attendance zones. Still others simply waited, citing local control and community readiness. Tulsa Public Schools, for example, did not begin meaningful desegregation efforts until the early 1960s, and even then the process was uneven. Oklahoma City became a site of extended legal struggle, with federal courts monitoring compliance well into the late 20th century. In 1971, federal intervention intensified after the Supreme Court's decision in Swan v. Charlotte Mecklenburg, which endorsed busing as a remedy. Desegregation in Oklahoma, as elsewhere, was not a single moment. It was a protracted negotiation involving courts, school boards, parents, and children. And here's the complication. While Brown struck down legal segregation, the process of integration often came at a cost to Black communities. Across Oklahoma, Black schools were closed. Black principals were demoted. Black teachers, many of whom had been pillars of their communities, were dismissed or not rehired in integrated systems. White administrators often assumed leadership in newly integrated schools. Students who once learned in culturally affirming environments were bused into schools where they faced hostility, isolation, and lowered expectations. What was gained was undeniable: access to better funded facilities, expanded curricular offerings, and the legal recognition of Black children's equal claim to public education. What was lost is equally important to name. Black schools had cultivated leadership, pride, intergenerational mentorship, and community cohesion. They were sites where history was taught with nuance, where discipline carried the weight of collective investment, where teachers knew families and families trusted teachers. Integration, as implemented, frequently dismantled these ecosystems without preserving their strengths. So today, as we reflect on the history of Black education in Oklahoma, we hold these truths together. We acknowledge the violence of enforced segregation. We celebrate the intellectual and cultural excellence forged within it. We honor the courage of those who demanded access to equal education. And we wrestle with the paradox that justice, when filtered through unequal power, can still produce loss. This history is not simply about policy or court rulings. It is about classrooms filled with children who carried the dreams of entire communities. It is about educators who built institutions out of scarcity. It is about families who believed that education was both shield and sword. And it asks us a pressing question. What would it mean today to build schools that combine the resources promised by Brown with the communal strength embodied by Oklahoma's historic Black schools? Thank you for being here to consider that question together.
I had a long bio I was going to read for both of them, but my favorite part of this is we'll get to hear from them themselves. So I thought I'd open this session up by asking both of you to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your education, those kind of things. So let's start maybe with Dr. Schoats. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. My name is Virginia Louise Flanagan Schoats. Give it all to you. I was born in Bonham, Texas, and my mother and we all moved to Paws Valley, Oklahoma, when I was 5 years old. Later, we moved to Ponca City, Oklahoma, where I grew up and received all of my high school education. Then I went to Langston University and graduated from Langston University, and later from Oklahoma State University, since they had Northeastern, and then Oklahoma State University. In the meantime, I met a man named Albert Schoats, who was from Muskogee, Oklahoma, and he and I at Langston University got together, and later we were married, and we were married for 50, how many years, Jennifer? We were married for 53 years, and we had 4 children, 5 with the little boy that didn't make it. He was born and died in birth, and our 4 daughters are very successful in their aspirations. One is deceased, but they are very good. We have 13 grandchildren, and my 13th grandchild will graduate with a bachelor's degree in May. Hey. Hey. That's what Oklahoma has produced. 13 of them with bachelor's degrees, and very successful. Many of them are lawyers and doctors and so forth. I'm very proud of our family because we have shown what Oklahoma education can do.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Schoats. Dr. Aldridge, tell us a little bit about you.
I hope my voice is strong enough. My name is Harold C. Aldridge, Jr. I'm before the baby boomers. My mama and daddy moved out to California because daddy was getting shipped out to World War II in the South Pacific. So mama stayed out in California, the San Francisco area. And I didn't find out until I was a grown man that she had been a Rosie Riveter. And the thing that was so important about that experience for her was that was the first time she could wear pants and not be seen as a floozy. Because they could wear pants at the shop and just stand up any way you wanted to and rivet the airplanes together. So I never saw my daddy until after 2 years, because mama was pregnant with me when she moved out to California, and then she stayed out there because her family had moved out there, her sisters and uncles and all of that. So I tell everybody in Oklahoma that I was born in a hospital. Most of the guys my age were born at home. And so I was born at a hospital that they wanted me to be in. So my mom moved back to Oklahoma when I was 6 months old, and she stayed with her parents there. My mama and daddy met each other out in Langston. He was a 2-time All-American stud that I felt intimidated by up until I was 50 years old. And one time when he ended up being my high school coach, and he was, when I was 14 years old, I was watching him deal with his athletic team. And so he was chiding them about them not being able to jump. My daddy was 6 feet tall, and at the time he smoked cigarettes. And so as he was chiding him, he walked out on the floor in street shoes and jumped up and grabbed the rim and surprised all of us. I had never seen him working out. And when he got back to the floor, when he turned loose of the rim and hit the floor, he said, Now, hell, that's what I'm talking about. And coming up under him, he was a strong disciplinarian. And because he was so successful in Taft, he was like the man. And I often wondered how he would come up with the stuff that he would, the plays and all that we ran. And Taft Moton High School at the time was a Class C school because of the numbers of students that we had in it. That we were the first team after desegregation to win 3 consecutive state championships. I was on all 3 teams, and I have to tell everybody that I didn't know I could score until I went to college, because I was a playmaker. I set things up and I did exactly what he said. Because to be the coach's son is one thing, but when you have to go home with the coach and he's chewing on you, and one time I was eating in a hurry, trying to eat and get away from him, and he was chiding on me. He was on me, and I was moving my feet. I didn't know it. And I was trying to hurry up and eat and get out the kitchen. And then he said, I don't mind you eating me out of house and home, but don't dance at the table. And one of the things that he did after desegregation was he realized that we were playing 5 against 7. The other 2 referees were not part of the team. They were with the other team. So he basically said, we're playing 5 against 7 whenever we played white folks, because we didn't get to play them until tournament time. Because up until then, we played other black schools. And he would tell us all the time, well, one of the things that he would do was either try to make us accept whatever was happening on the court. And you had to be careful about any and everything, because a foul would be called or a violation. And one of the things that he said was to us, I want you to be gentlemen. And so he said to us, I want you to display that all the time, even when a foul is called on you and you know you didn't do it, or a violation. But then he gave us an out. He would say, when there's a foul, I don't want you slinging your hand or even acting as if you're angry. He said, I want to see some teeth. He says, hold your hand up quick and then smile. And then he said, now under your breath you can say, shit. You go ahead.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So part of the reason why we're here, and you can see Dr. Aldridge, we already have a few interviews with him, so it's always wonderful to hear his stories. Part of the reason why we're here today, or I guess the main reason, was the book that Dr. Aldridge wrote, and so I want to talk a little bit about it. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, Dr. Aldridge began this research project where he started interviewing former educators who taught both during segregation and during and after school desegregation, from that 50s all the way to the 60s, 70s. And so These interviews have been recorded. He videotaped these interviews. We've been working together to help digitize and make them available eventually to a larger public audience. But the goal was to help tell the stories of these teachers. And so we're very fortunate that Dr. Schoats was one of the teachers he interviewed. So rather than play clips from a lot of these people who are no longer with us, we have the great fortune of having one of the teachers with us. So I guess my next question for both of you, and we'll start with you again, Dr. Schoats, tell us just about your experience attending segregated schooling. Help maybe people understand who may not be familiar with that history or experience.
Okay, we attended what we call segregated schools, but we did not know that the schools were necessarily segregated. We just knew we were in school. They had excellent teachers, and they prepared us for the world, actually. And I can remember how intense it was in our schools for us to know how to read, write, and understand. We were taught in every classroom that it is important for you to read, to write, and understand, and be able to verbalize what you have been taught. We were often asked to say it out loud, to do it over and over again. So our teachers were extremely consistent across the board, as I remember. And my first experience was in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, and then later we moved to Parker City, Oklahoma. And I can truthfully say that the desires of those teachers was always to impart the knowledge that we needed in order to transcend. Always they were talking about the future, and they kept encouraging us that when you get through with high school, don't stop there, continue, go to college. I didn't know what they were talking about hardly, because there was nobody in Park City that I knew, going to college. And then they started talking about Tonkawa. There was a college in Tonkawa. Is that right? Yes. And we didn't know too much about that, so it was very foreign to us to be told that there was school after high school. Seemed like our major goal was finishing high school. It was always our main goal, finishing high school. And they pounded on that all the time. The teachers did. You have to finish high school. You have to be verbal. You have to be able to talk. You have to be able to read. You have to be able to write. And it was just consistent all the time with every class that we attended. Our teachers were completely dedicated. I don't remember any of them ever being absent. You would want them to be absent, but they weren't. They were there every day, and they were always prepared, and they seemed to have been doing what was necessary for them to do. The other thing that I remember, and I tell this to people, but it's hard for me to explain it. Our schools competed against each other. What I'm saying is that we would have interscholastic meets. We would have band festivals, chorus festivals, where we would come together, and our courses would compete against each other to see who had the best course in high school in the state, and who had the best band in the state, who had the best scholars in the state. Of course, the Muscogee Manual always came out ahead of everybody. They beat Booker Washington, they beat Oklahoma City Douglas, they beat everybody, But we were always there competing with them. And we would do speeches, and we would do solos with our instruments. I did a solo at the state band festival with Reese. Abelard Reese was the director. I was so proud of myself because I went back home bragging about it. It was really something to have a solo at a state band festival. I played the baritone. Would you believe it? I played it. I weighed about 112 pounds. I weighed a big horn. And I enjoyed playing that horn. But we had competitions like that. And I think back on that, and I wondered, who ever thought of that? But we would compete with each other, and who was the best soloist, who was the best choir, which had the best instrument. And a lot of it would occur at Langston University on Langston University's campus. So we were exposed to college, to being on the college campus. They were at the same time that they were preparing us, they were also pushing us toward going further than just high school. And it was just amazing. Now, in our schools, we would have basketball tournaments. We would have football tournaments. We didn't have much football at first when I was in high school because the boys all went to the Army. We didn't have any boys in high school for a while there, that were old enough and big enough to play football. So the only sport that we had was basketball for a while until the boys came back. And do you know those boys came back from the service that went to school? Big old, tall, big old people. We said, those boys sure are old, because they were 19 and 20. But they came back and visited high school at our school. And they would, and we would have basketball tournaments with other schools, and those tournaments would just be so lively. We had cheerleaders. We just did everything that you could find in any high school. In such a small school as Ponca City, with only about 75 kids in the whole high school. But we did all those things. Can you imagine that? They had us to experience everything that any large high school would have had. And then the other thing that I think about, we would put on programs where we would, dance on the stage, and we'd also have acting, and we would perform and all of that. And do you know they would invite us to Continental Oil Company to come out and perform for them? It was exciting, And so we go perform for the white people. And excuse me, being about English white. I don't mean to get insulted. But we would go out and they'd ask us to come to Continental Oil Company and perform for them. And we'd go and put on our shows that we had put on at the high school for our students. And we'd go out and sing and dance and do whatever it was that we had been doing. And I just thought, this is amazing. But that's the kind of atmosphere that we had at our high school where the kids all participated. Everybody had to participate in something. Everybody had to be in something. They had to be in the band. They had to be in New Homes of well, I can't even think right now. But anyway, they had different clubs that you had to be in. You had to be in the basketball team. You had to be. Everybody had to participate in something in addition to doing the classwork. And it made for, all around good students. And it was an atmosphere of competitiveness, but yet an atmosphere of camaraderie that you had in the high school. Everybody just working together. We were planning to do one thing or another. We were going to get together and have a social, and then we were going to serve. We were going to have something afterwards, or we were going to have a play, and after the play, we were going to perform. Or it was always something that we were involved in when we were in high school. And the teachers were always so close to us, and they would just push us and work with us and help us to come out with whatever talents we had and bring those talents out. So it was a very wonderful thing. We didn't realize, I didn't even realize that we were in a separate school until I went to Langston. When I went to Langston, I realized, they've got a white high school in Ponca City. It just wasn't something that you thought about. You just knew that you were nourished and you were well cared for. You were and you had a good school and things were good for you, and you did what you had to do in your school. And we didn't even think about it until I came back. And when I came back to Ponca City, they were talking about integration. Well, I got my degree, and they hired me to come back and teach English in Ponca City at Abbott's. And that's when we really found out, that it wasn't going to be this way forever. Our kids were not going to be like this forever. Because that 1 year After that 1 year, they completely closed down all of our school, and everybody had to go to the white schools, and they fired the black teachers, as many of them as they could. They didn't fire some of the really older ones, but the ones who came in, like me, they fired us. And it was heartbreaking. What else was I supposed to say?
They got down.
That was at a period of time. Since both of my parents were school teachers, I was familiar with what was going on when Oklahoma was segregated and when they desegregated. And as Dr. Schoats was saying, the community and the schools were in conjunction, and they got along well. Even the custodian had some say-so in the school system because he had kids going to the school. Anybody who worked there was involved. And so there was a community. And whenever there was something going on at the school, which ended up being the central focus of the community, everybody attended. And Taft, where I grew up, was a country town. And what we would say is even the country people who lived outside of Taft would come in, and there would be laughing and carrying on and handshaking and going on because everybody knew everybody. And the thing was, not only were the teachers telling you that it was important for you to get a good education, but the community also was pushing for you to be a good citizen of the world. And that's the emphasis that was done at most of these schools. And Oklahoma at the time had about almost 100 black high schools. And the surrounding communities from the black towns, like being from a black town, we had what they call an independent school district, which meant that we had our own superintendent and a principal, and we didn't have to take secondhand books and all of that, which the dependent school, segregated schools had to. And I had family members that were growing up in the dependent schools, and I got to see some of the books that they had handed down and the typewriters and all of that. And I didn't know about taking secondhand anything in my community. But when I was teaching at Northeastern, they asked me, black students asked me to come in and make a presentation about what segregation was like and what the desegregation was like. I made the presentation that day, and the next day, one of my co-workers met me in the hallway, and she appreciated what I had to say, but then she said to me that we didn't have racial problems in the Little Dixie, is where she came from, southeastern part of Oklahoma. And I thought then, what has happened? Why? What are you saying to me? Because I remember the signs, separate water fountains, and You couldn't go to the front of Tasty Freeze and get anything. You had to go around the side. And don't you think about going inside. When I was 8 years old, I broke my arm being a fool, fell out of a tree. My dad, who had just been back 6 years from crawling around in the South Pacific, couldn't take me to the Muskogee Hospital because they turned us away. And the black hospital that they had didn't have the x-rays and anesthetics and all of that. So they put me out with ether, blowing on a towel. They put ether on a towel and I had to blow on it. They said blow, which means you had to inhale. That was the environment I had started waking up to, that things are different. At 9 years old, I was learning that things were different. And that I had to listen to what my folks were saying, although I was influenced by the young people I was growing up with. I could hear my folks talking about what we needed to do as a people. So I was picking up on this stuff, and it made me angry. But then, as Dr. Schoats said, we also knew that things were going to change. And in '54, when Brown versus the Board of Education came through, many of the black teachers in the smaller schools, they desegregated early, so they lost their jobs. And 1 in every 3 black teachers lost their jobs starting in '54 all the way to 1970. And then they had to get serious about it because the slow and deliberate speed, it was exactly that. And in places where they could get away with that, they did. They built black schools up, and they thought that they were going to keep this segregation forever. And in the South, they did, because what they did is they didn't have schools, they had academies, which was segregated all over again. And when Oklahoma started to desegregate, it's been athletically influenced. That many times in some of the small schools, you kept the black basketball team, but then there's black schools that couldn't afford a football team. The white schools would allow the players, the black players, on their team, but they had to get their butts across the tracks when football season was over or after practice. So that started in schools like that I'm familiar with, in Haskell, Oklahoma, and Broken Bow, and Beggs, and Okmulgee. They would get the black players on the football team, but that was to allow the communities to accept the desegregation that was happening. And the reason I use the word desegregation is that we've never had integration in Oklahoma. It has been desegregation. And what we have today is resegregation. And that's what I try to tell people. I say, when they see gated community, don't buy it. just because they took the segre off the first of it, it's still the same thing. And so when I made the presentation, I tried to let the kids know that we have to stay prepared. How am I doing?
You're
Okay. And when I decided that I was going to make a difference, and that's the title of the book, What If the Past Was Lost Forever, Then Who Would Pass on What? I knew that it would come up and be gentrified, whitewashed. Because although I grew up here in Oklahoma, I never heard of the race riot, is what they used to call it, that happened in Tulsa. I found that out when I was teaching school in Tulsa by accident in 1968. When I went down to a friend's house, we were going rabbit hunting, and his mother said something about the Tulsa race riot. And I had never heard of that. I stopped and we loaded the dogs up, and I said, "Miss Kanzada, what do you mean, Tulsa race riot? I never heard of it." And she had been in it and had run to escape it. And she said, "We found some good white folks in Coweta, and they helped us get to the river, the Arkansas River, and they came across it and they hid in Taft." I never heard that before. And I said, when did that happen? She told me the year and that she remembered the date. And I had to look that up myself. Even though I grew up and went to a black high school from a black town, my folks never said anything about it. My grandparents never said anything about it. It was a hush, hush, which is still happening today. A hush, hush. Don't pass anything around. And so when I started listening to these people tell me their stories, I had to learn how to ask questions, because I was talking with school teachers, and then usually when I went to talk to them, they had their little pads out, they had little outlines about what they were going to talk about. And I would start out by finding out first, when did you first realize you were an independent person? You had some say-so. And then I would gradually gear them toward their education. And once they accessed that information, that memory, they would take off. And then I was just being along for the ride. And many of them, they caught me up. I was there with them emotionally, because many times they were there emotionally. They had gotten locked in, and they would catch me up, and I would find myself getting angry, or I would find myself crying. And neither one of those things seemed to have affected them, because they had locked in. And I realized how important it was what I was doing. And I thought, okay, you've got to complete this. And I did. And I decided I couldn't do all of the teachers of Oklahoma, so I made a cross-section of Oklahoma. from Muskogee to Lawton, from Ponca City to Broken Bow. And I just, by word of mouth, and when I went to interview Claire Looper, who was instrumental in desegregating Oklahoma, I walked up to the door. I had a little cheap camera and all of that, and I told her, Miss Looper, my name is Harold Aldridge, Jr., and I sent you all this information. She said, come on in. She was sitting at her couch with her bare feet up on the table looking through a phone directory. And when I told her who I was, she said, I taught with your daddy his first teaching job after World War II. And you didn't have to tell me who you were. I could look at that head of yours. I could look at that head and tell who you were. And so those were the people that I got to interview. And I had an inside straight because they knew my parents. They had been in the all-black school, segregated school system, the Oklahoma Negro Teachers Association is OANT. And one of the people that I interviewed said it was an acronym that OA niggas tough, because they would get together and try to figure out ways of raising money or getting something going that would help the school system and help them in their teaching. And that I was learning all this stuff as I went. I thought I knew something until I started interviewing these teachers. And then most of them were saying, this should have been done years ago because we've lost so many people that could have contributed to this experience.
Well, I want to talk about something that I thought was kind of unusual in Ponca City. And that's the place where I worked for about 5 to 10 years. It was called the Blue Moon. And a lot of our high school students in Ponca City worked there. The Blue Moon was a restaurant that catered to the very highest of the society in Ponca City among the white people. And it was owned, operated, and facilitated by black people. There was a black man that owned it. We were black kids that worked there, and we wore uniforms, and we looked, professional, and we carried on business with that. And black people were not allowed to come inside that restaurant to eat. If they wanted something to eat, they came to the back door, and they were given a to-go package. And we thought nothing of it. But that's what went on for years. Now, just think about that now. We owned it, we operated it, we waited on the customers, and I worked there for years to supplement my income. But it was we never thought anything about it. Can you believe that you would have a restaurant like that, but that's what it was called, the Blue Moon. And other restaurants were there too, with the same philosophy. And they were like that in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, where you had restaurants that only catered to white people, but was owned, operated, and everything by black people.
Thank you for that insight. In your recounting of your experiences attending segregated schooling, you both mentioned your teachers and how incredible your teachers are. And that seems to be a theme among folks who speak of their experiences attending segregated schools. So can you talk to how people should remember this history of black educators and schools in Oklahoma? What is their legacy today?
I had an English teacher. Her name was Mrs. Moore. She was from Oklahoma City, and she taught in Parker City. And I had a teacher named Mr. Fowler, and he was my band teacher. And I remember Mr. Fowler calling me in one day, and he said, "Virginia?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Don't you think you should go to college?" I said, "Go to college?" I said, I didn't have a father. I just had a mother. And I worked all the time. That's how I stayed in school. I said, "How can I go to college? I can't afford that." He said, "Why don't we see what we can do?" And he wrote a letter to Grambling and wrote a letter to Langston, and they gave me a $25 scholarship because of Mr. Fowler. That's the kind of teachers they were. And I went to Langston with that $25, and I thought it was a lot of money until I got out there. And I found out that this is a drop in the bucket. But what I'm trying to say is they were more than interested in just teaching you how to play the instrument. I play the instrument in the band, but he was more interested in what's going to happen to you after you leave here. And we had science teachers that didn't have any equipment in the laboratories, but they would buy stuff and bring it and put it in there so that we could have something to work. They took money out of their own pockets to buy stuff for us so that we would have something to work with when we got in the laboratories. I know that's for a fact because I worked there 1 year in Park City. They didn't give me any money either, so if I wanted my kids to have something, I had to go and buy it for them myself. And that's how black teachers did. They didn't think anything. They buy pencils, paper. They bought all kinds of stuff for the kids in order for them to have what they needed. I can remember one of my friends, she would say, "What you getting? When are you going to go shopping?" I said, "I guess I'll go." I was in Douglas then. She said, I said, "I guess I'll go this weekend." She said, "Yeah, you got to get those kids some pencils and paper because you had to get it for them because sometimes they wouldn't have it. Our children just didn't have it. And the schools weren't buying it, so we had to buy it. The teachers bought it. But the kids didn't do without it because the teachers bought it. They bought them clothes. I have a friend, she's gone to heaven now, but she bought those girls brassieres. Their first bras. She brought the boys sometimes their first, pair of pants or something. Whatever the kids needed, those black teachers provided for them. I don't know if you had that kind of experience or not in your childhood, but I'm just telling you what I saw in Muskogee and in Park City and different places with teachers. They would take us on trips. Honest to goodness, they would take us on trips, and we wouldn't have any money. So what would happen? They'd buy the stuff that we needed out of their pockets. We wouldn't know where it came from. But if we had to have food or whatever, the teachers just bought it for us. That's the kind of teachers we had. And I think about that sometimes and I wonder, have I paid back enough? Did I pay back enough for all the help that was given me when I was growing up as a child with the kind of black teachers that we had in our schools? And it was nothing for them. It was, "Virginia, you don't have a source of," and they go get it for me and give it to me. That's the kind of teachers we had.
Oh, that's the kind of teacher I had. Right here. She was my high school teacher, English teacher. And when I was putting this book together, I first did a historical research of education in Oklahoma. Why was it segregated? And how did Oklahoma become a segregated state? Because at the time it was supposed to be let in to be a state without segregation. And Bill Murray, Alfalfa Bill, and the rest of the boys, good old boys, say let's tell him what he wants to hear, and as soon as we get the statehood, then we'll go on and do what we wanted to do in the first place. So that's how Oklahoma became a red state, and it's still with us today. And like Doctor was saying, how we were raised to think in a communal sense. My mother's first teaching job was at a segregated two-room school building. First to the 8th grade, she had all of us in there. And I remember her teaching many of the kids how to brush their teeth, how to use baking soda and salt as a mixture, buying toothbrushes to help the kids with their teeth. And so that's how the communal thing was. You've got to learn something so it can be better for the people. Because as my grandfather used to say, what kind of citizen are you going to be? What contributions can you make to help our people pull ourselves up for things to be better for everybody? And that's the experiences that I had at the high school I went to. There was the community had a relationship with the school system. After desegregation, many of the teachers that I interviewed say that they saw black kids and the black community falling away from the school systems, because when they desegregated, they also got rid of all the trophies and anything that the black schools had won in debate or anything like that. And if somebody didn't take it, it went to the dumps. And some of the teachers that I interviewed said that they retrieved the trophies from the dumps, or they took them home and they tried to spread them out with the community. And when that happened, the black students started falling away from the school systems, and then the parents started falling out with the school systems because most of the disciplinarian kind of information and activities were coming down hard on the black kids as they were falling away from the school systems. And if you don't get someone to help build something and it makes them feel less than, they're going to tear it down. And that's just human nature. If they don't see something that's in line with what they feel makes them feel important, then they'll tear it down. That's just a psychological thing that people tend to do. And so when that started happening, the community then started fighting with the school systems. I'm tired of my kid being mistreated for this or that reason. And so in that sense, desegregation hurt the black community because of how desegregation was instrumented. And if it had been done differently, inclusive, to the point of diversity and equity, which is a curse word today. And the reason what I say is, they've turned the into DIE instead of DEI, and it has become a slur to be woke. That's amazing. It's amazing to me when you consider what woke really means and when did it start, which is what our teachers were trying to tell us then. You've got to wake up and educate yourselves, which is what I learned when I found out that there was a Tulsa race riot. I had to educate myself. I had to take another look at what was history, what is being taught, and why is it this way. And I had to deal with my own anger at the mistreatment that we were getting by the miseducation that we were exposed to. And I did everything I could to try to make a difference. And I think that most of the black teachers at that period of time, that's what they were trying to do. They're trying to wake people up and assume a responsibility, because, as Doc said, in those schools, you had to be involved. You had to do something. If you're not on the basketball team, you were instrumental as far as making sure that the balls were all gathered up. And you had to do something. In the plays that were done, even quiet people were given something to do. If they would just stand on stage and grin, you had to do something and to be a part of the school. And as I said, the bus drivers, the cooks, the managers, they had an investment in the schools working well because their kids went there. And there was no such thing as a boy thinking that he's going to fight somebody. You know, that was out because of all the male teachers that were there. You're not going to whip anybody. You better start thinking, boy, and waking up to the fact that you have a responsibility that you don't know that you have yet. And so that was kind of like what it was like.
So we have 5 minutes, and I don't think we can get them to start and stop and answer in 5 minutes. So I'm going to do a final plug for his book, and then I'll maybe let you guys say some final words. So Dr. Aldridge's book is available in Barnes & Noble. You can buy it online. There is a copy that you can check out here in the OSU library that features the interviews that he talked about. He has donated the digital copies of those interviews. They are currently with the oral history program here in the library, and in the months to come, we will work with Dr. Aldridge to make those available. So there's one clip that's especially moving of Gertrude Lewis, who talks about that burden of desegregation that fell onto black students and teachers. So I encourage you, it's on our website and social media. I encourage you to watch that one. That was one Dr. Aldridge requested. So we will be making those available. And if you'd love to hear both of these wonderful individuals talk, we have interviews with both of them available. You can learn more about their lives in very great detail. And so I guess maybe I'll go ahead and call it, and then I'll let people come up here and talk with you guys. But can we give a final round of applause to Dr. Schoats and Aldridge?